Every record has been destroyed or falsified, and the process is continuing day by day and minute by minute. Well, it's a chilling thought, isn't it? Have you ever stopped to consider how the very words you use every single day might be subtly restricting your everyday freedom of thought? Just think about it deeply for a second. If a word is literally erased from existence, can you even summon the thought it represents?
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going on a really fascinating journey to uncover the unseen forces that shape our reality. We'll be drawing directly from the profound insights in Thomas Alethea's work, 12 Steps to a Good Life. We're going to look specifically at how our minds and our vocabularies can be completely manipulated by the world around us. You know, these language traps act like invisible chains, holding back our cognitive potential. And breaking these chains, that is the absolute key to reclaiming our worldview and finally seeing reality exactly as it is.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's the path we're taking today. First, the threat of newspeak. Then, the three umpires of truth. Next, how society shrinks thought. Then we'll look at being trapped in the box. And finally, escaping the language trap.
Starting with Section 1, the threat of newspeak, controlling the mind through words.
To solve any problem, we first have to clearly define it, right? And the fundamental problem we're facing here is the weaponization of language itself. Aletheia brings our attention to newspeak, a concept borrowed from George Orwell's 1984. This concept perfectly illustrates how the manipulation and limitation of vocabulary is used to control society and restrict freedom of thought. In Orwell's world, the government didn't just ban rebellious actions or lock people up. Instead, they actively engineered a language designed to make rebellious thought literally impossible. If you intentionally eliminate the words that convey dissent, nuance, or freedom, you effectively wipe out the human mind's ability to even conceptualize those ideas. Aletheia uses this not just as a literary reference, but as a stark, urgent philosophical warning against the subtle, modern manipulation of language we see happening today. When nuance is stripped from our daily discourse, our everyday freedom of thought is fundamentally restricted.
So, the crucial point here is summed up brilliantly by this quote from the text. It is hard to think out of the box when we are in the box. The author uses this box as a metaphor for our current set of thoughts, beliefs, and attitudes. It's essentially our entire worldview. When our vocabulary is restricted, whether that's by societal forces or just our own ingrained habits, that box physically shrinks around us. Imagine trying to solve a complex, multi-layered geopolitical crisis, but you're only allowed to use 3 highly polarized words to describe it. You just can't do it. The only solutions we can see are the ones already trapped inside that tiny space with us. To find new knowledge and true wisdom, we absolutely must find a way out.
Which brings us to Section 2, the 3 umpires of truth, how reality is constructed.
But how exactly does our cognitive box get so small in the first place? To answer that, we have to shift our focus to epistemology, which is just a fancy way of saying how we define reality and how we know what we know. Aletheia uses this brilliant baseball analogy. Picture 3 different umpires. The first umpire represents objective truth. He stands behind the plate and says, "I call them as they are." This is hard, measurable reality. It's the gravity you bump into whether you believe in it or not. The second umpire represents subjective truth, saying, "I call them as I see them." Now this is shaped by your personal experience and your individual perception. But the third umpire represents constructed truth. He boldly declares, "Nay, nothing until I call them." This type of truth is created entirely by societal and cultural norms. And let that sink in for a moment, because this right here is exactly where the danger lies. Constructed truth is the absolute breeding ground for language manipulation and postmodern relativism. I mean, if truth is simply whatever society decides it is on any given day, then whoever controls the language entirely controls the truth.
Let's look at Section 3, how society shrinks thought, the invisible boundaries.
Now that we see how deeply vulnerable constructed truth really is, let's examine the active, invisible mechanisms that society uses to keep our cognitive boxes so small and restrictive. A key mechanic here is the Sapir-Whorf theory. This is the linguistic principle that the language you speak fundamentally shapes how you perceive the world around you. It's not just that language describes a pre-existing reality. Language actively constrains what your brain is actually capable of processing. Think about a master painter who has 50 different words for the color blue. When they look at the sky, they see a radically different, vastly more detailed reality than someone who only has one word for it. If society removes nuanced words from our daily discourse, replacing them with polarized, emotionally charged slogans, our cognitive processes are actively constrained. We literally lose the psychological ability to see the gray areas in life.
And this brilliantly illustrates our next concept, the Overton window. This represents the dynamic range of ideas that are currently deemed acceptable by mainstream society.
Have you ever noticed how an idea can go from being considered completely radical or unthinkable to entirely mainstream in just a few short years? Well, that is the Overton window shifting. The text notes that policymakers and advocates strategically shape this window all the time. By manipulating language, they can pull the window to promote certain ideas while completely pushing dissenting or complex thoughts out of existence. If an idea falls outside the Overton window, you aren't just disagreed with in a debate, you're labeled as entirely unacceptable to even speak to.
And relentlessly enforcing all of these invisible boundaries is groupthink. This is the phenomenon where the psychological desire for consensus completely overrides independent critical thought. Through social contagion and intense peer pressure, society enforces these constructed errors onto the individual. And here's the real tragedy of it all. Disagreeing becomes socially dangerous, and so we self-censor. We suppress our own dissenting opinions just to maintain harmony. We voluntarily give up our own voice, further shrinking our own cognitive box right from the inside.
Moving to Section 4, Trapped in the Box, Internalizing the Manipulation.
That tragedy of giving up our voice brings us to the next layer of the problem. It isn't just that society limits our language from the outside, it's that we actually internalize this manipulation. We transition from facing external pressures to setting internal language traps for ourselves. Aletheia outlines several cognitive distortions. These are irrational thought patterns that deeply impact our mental health. Look at how these are fundamentally issues of a restricted vocabulary. Take all or nothing thinking. This is what it sounds like in your head. If I'm not a total success, I am a complete and utter failure. It forces reality into black and white extremes, totally ignoring the vast spectrum of actual human experience. Then there's labeling. This is taking the incredible, boundless complexity of a human being and reducing them to a single, low-resolution word, like idiot or villain. Stripping this nuance from our personal vocabulary severely limits our ability to grasp reality. We're just blinding ourselves to the actual world.
And this brings us to a very powerful quote from the author regarding our internal monologue. Shoulda, woulda, coulda, language that keeps you stuck. Words like should, must, and ought to create incredibly rigid, unrealistic demands on ourselves and the world around us. They are open-ended obligations that are rarely resolved, causing constant inner conflict. When we use this demanding vocabulary, we are basically engaging in a form of self-imposed newspeak. We are limiting our own psychological freedom. We aren't accepting reality as it is. Instead, we're punishing ourselves for not living up to a constructed ideal, keeping us firmly trapped inside our own cognitive box.
Let's move to our final section and see how this all builds towards a solution. Section 5, Escaping the Language Trap, Reclaiming Your Mind.
So, how do we break out of this box? How do we reclaim our minds from both society and ourselves? The text provides several really powerful, active solutions. First, we have to understand the critical difference between thought suppression and thought stopping. Thought suppression is passive and unhealthy. It's like trying to hold a giant beach ball underwater. You desperately try to distract yourself to avoid an uncomfortable thought, but eventually it forcefully explodes right to the surface. Thought stopping, however, is an active, conscious process. It's noticing the beach ball, catching a distorted thought in its tracks, accepting that it's there, realizing it isn't helpful, and actively replacing it with a healthier, more realistic thought. It puts you firmly back in the driver's seat.
Another highly effective, methodical tool is Socratic questioning. Instead of blindly accepting the restricted thoughts handed to you by society, you systematically interrogate them. Think of this as a tactical toolkit for your mind. You explore the intricate details of an idea. You reveal the hidden unconscious assumptions lingering beneath it, and you trace the logical consequences of that thought all the way to their conclusion. This disciplined approach is exactly how you distinguish genuine, objective knowledge from enforced societal ignorance. It actively breaks down the walls of your cognitive box, piece by piece.
Next up is the concept of cognitive reframing. This relies on the profound realization that external events themselves have no inherent meaning. They only possess the meaning we assign to them based on our unconscious assumptions. By deliberately changing just a single word or shifting your viewpoint, you can alter your entire emotional response. The text highlights an awesome technique called inversion, flipping a thought to restate it from the exact opposite perspective. For example, instead of thinking, I'm stuck in this terrible traffic, inversion allows you to reframe it as, this traffic is keeping me safe from rushing into an accident ahead. It completely detaches you from the automatic negative emotion and reveals entirely new truths.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how this tackles the ultimate language trap, the philosophical error of confusing the map with the territory. Think about it this way. The word water cannot quench your thirst.
The word is just a clumsy symbol. It's a two-dimensional map pointing to the actual physical thing. When we treat our mental representations, our labels, and our socially constructed words as if they are objective reality, we make terrible, restrictive errors in judgment. We start living inside the map instead of actually exploring the territory. We have to constantly remind ourselves that language is merely a tool to describe the world, not the world itself.
Which leaves us with this final, absolutely vital question to ponder. Are you living in reality? Or are you just living in the words you've been given to describe it? You know, when you take back control of your vocabulary, you fundamentally take back control of your mind. You step out of the restricted box, and you finally have the freedom to see the world as it truly is. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this empowers you to examine your own worldview more deeply than ever before.